Iowa fans, you are probably becoming more and more excited about this season. I've got to say that I'm becoming more and more intrigued by the week. One huge step down in the quest to win the Big Ten Western Division Championship, and who knows beyond that. Iowa Hawkeyes live right here at the Voice of College Football. Corey Bratta is here from the Hawkeye of the Storm, where you can get your Iowa football coverage each and every day. Corey, how are you today?
Doing good, Mark. I'm in a very positive mood, and I'm going to be coming to my Hawkeyes defense on a couple of things. I heard a segment with you the other day, and I've got a bone to pick.
Oh,
we don't have to pick it right away, but I actually had a chance to watch the Iowa-Wisconsin game back. I did go up. I know I told you Friday night I wasn't going to Madison. That changed. I ended up going up to Madison, so I was able to watch the game back on television today for the first time, and I was impressed with a number of things. So I'm looking forward to this show, and I know we got Daniel House who'll be jumping on with us to talk Minnesota and the Gophers. So, yeah, whatever you want to start with, we got a lot. Unfortunate news today confirmed regarding Eric All. Maybe we should start there.
Yeah, let's start there because Eric All has obviously been a huge portion of this offense, was expected to be from the outset, but especially with the injury to Luke Lachey and now Eric All.
Well, there's no question the passing game is, if anybody missed it, he's out. He's got a torn ACL. He's done. So terrible news. It's amazing. We talk about the passing game and how bad it has been. And you have to, I mean, it is fair to say, Mark, that when Luke Lachey went down, he was clearly their top receiver, even though he's a tight end. Now Eric All has went down. He was clearly their top receiver when he went down. He's tight end. And their number one quarterback went down with a season-ending injury. So those are facts. Now, the passing game still needs to be better. Nobody's debating that. But the way they played Saturday, and by the way, well wishes to Eric All. He's got a year left. I've had people ask me, could he come back next year? Sure, he could. He's got a year left because he played during COVID. Was injured early last year, which counted as his redshirt year. I don't know that he could even file for a medical hardship waiver to get 2 years, but he has at least 1 year back if he wants it. I think he's going to be on draft boards, but with the ACL injury, how will that affect him? Because he was really good when he was healthy this year. So well wishes to him, and I hope they can get Addison Estringa back this week. That's going to be a big storyline to follow. The sophomore from, I think it's Sun Prairie, Wisconsin, young man who I was high on coming out of high school and worked his way into some playing time last year as a true freshman. He's their number one guy at tight end if he's healthy. And Steven Stylianos was the number one guy on Saturday. Johnny Pascuzzi got some playing time. And then true freshman Zach Ortworth, who's impressed the coaches in fall camp and throughout the summer. He is now playing number 48, and we saw him actually in on that big run, that touchdown run from LaShawn Williams. So the great news is, Mark, they've had I shouldn't say the great news. The bad news is they've had a lot of injuries at tight end. The good news is the injuries have come at tight end because it is the deepest position on the Iowa offense. I think if we're looking at, injuries coming at tailback even, I mean, they've had a couple of injuries, but certainly not season ending. I'd be more concerned. I don't want to see what we saw against Penn State, where you basically have LaShawn Williams and then a bunch of true freshmen behind him. So thankfully, it looks like they're rounding into health there. And, offensive line is starting to click, so you don't want injuries there. They have stayed pretty healthy. Knock on wood. That's the one position, Mark. Had a couple of guys dinged up here and there. Bo Stevens was down at one point. Connor Colby, I think, was down at one point. For the most part, they've been healthy. And the line finally looked good on Saturday. And that it's been a while since we've been able to say that collectively. They looked good on Saturday. They looked good in pass pro. They looked good in the run game. And that's really my bone to pick with you, Mark, because I listened to your little segment you published with your caller, and you made a comment, and I don't have the quote written down, but you made a comment that Iowa's run game really didn't do anything minus the 80-some yard touchdown run from LaShawn Williams. And I've got some numbers to share with you, Mark, if you want me to jump into those, unless you want to explain yourself first. Explain yourself to all the Hawkeye fans out there.
Well, I basically said that other than converting some third downs to keep drives alive to maintain a lead, that there was only one meaningful, impactful play in the game offensively for Iowa, and that was the 82-yard touchdown run.
Okay. So that's a fair explanation. Just to make it clear, they went 4.8 as a team, 4.8 yards per carry when you take away the 3 Deacon Hill sacks. Okay, 4.8 yards per carry. Now, The 82-yard run is part of that. You can't take it away, but let's just take it away for the sake of this discussion. Even without the 82-yard run, they averaged 3.1 on the ground, which is below what you want. Obviously, 4 is always the target, but 3.1, again, without the big run, which is part of the game. And Iowa's kind of had they've developed somewhat of a reputation this year of breaking off big runs. They did it against Purdue. They did it against Iowa State. Now they did it against Wisconsin. So I don't know. At some point, I start to think, well, the big runs aren't just anomalies. This is kind of how their run game is working right now. They kind of bite you, and then eventually chomp down and get a big run. And we saw some breakaway speed from LaShawn on Saturday. The big thing for me, Mark, is we're seeing less and less negative runs. I mean, I think back to last year, even a couple of games this year, but last year, so many, and even go back to 2021, so many -4, -5 runs. Go back to the Tyler Goodson era. They were good in 2020, but it just seems like this Iowa offense, inside, outside zone, they've got a lot more gap concepts, it seems like this year. They've got it, the counter play has worked well for them. They just seem to have adjusted. Maybe that's the John Budmeyer effect, and maybe just the maturation of George Barnett's group up front, to where they aren't getting those negative run plays. And although they're not, exceedingly dominant on a play-by-play basis, they're good. And they've got solid backs right now. I think LaShawn and Jazz are the two best backs in this team, maybe not in that order. We haven't seen Jazz healthy. I think when Jazz comes back, he's got an opportunity maybe to be the best back. But boy, you can't argue with what LaShawn Williams is doing right now. And I like Caleb Johnson. Don't get me wrong. He's a big back who's got the potential to be like a Braylon Allen. The problem is he does not welcome contact like Braylon Allen. He doesn't seem to get down and lay the hit like Braylon Allen does, and he doesn't seem to have the quick twitch that Braylon Allen does. And honestly, on Saturday, LaShawn looked like the far better back. And that was reflected this week in the depth chart. Usually depth charts, we don't read too much into those. I think there's a reason, though. You saw Kirk Ferentz flip those two on the chart. My guess is part of that is because of the performance from LaShawn on Saturday. And they also want to set up a little bit of a fire under Caleb. He had 41 yards on 17 carries, so a little under 3 yards per carry. That's not good enough. And unless he can break off a big run, he's had a hard time getting yards after contact. And so anyways, that's my only thing. I think the run game was pretty darn good, given the fact that they were on the road playing Wisconsin, who's traditionally really good against the run. Now, the passing game is a totally different discussion. Wisconsin came into this game overall for the season the worst pass offense in the Big Ten. That's an incredible stat, but that's a fact. Heading into this game, Wisconsin was dead last in the conference in pass defense. So, the fact that Iowa threw for 37 yards and won by 2 scores is incredible. And you know where I stand with the offense, Mark. You know where I stand with Brian Ferentz. You know how I feel what's going to happen if they go up against a big dog. But you can't argue with this. They're 6-1 right now, and they were in control of that Wisconsin game pretty much throughout. You're not going to blow teams out playing this way, but if the run game is working and Deacon Hill doesn't make mistakes, they're going to win almost every game left on the schedule, maybe every game left on the schedule. And that's assuming that Lachey doesn't sound like he may try to come back for the bowl game. Your top 2 tight ends and your quarterback are all out. I still think they can get that done. I think at some point they're going to have to throw the football, right? Like they're not going to be able to do this, play the way they did Saturday, I don't think, on a neutral field against Ohio State and have a shot. But I don't know. I just don't know how you argue with it at some point. And it's true. You've recognized it too. Iowa has this weird propensity to find a way to win games in complete odd fashion that nobody else seems to be able to replicate. I heard a stat yesterday. Let me see if I can pull it out of the back of my brain. I believe Iowa has, since I don't know when this stretches back to, like the last 3 years or something like this, they have won 6 games in which they've had like less than 300 yards total offense? Some weird stat like that. The next closest FBS team in the country has won 2 where they've had less than 300 yards. So like that I don't really quite understand how Iowa does it the way they do it. obviously the defense is great, the special teams is great, and we've been talking about this for years. But it's amazing, and you do have to give Kirk Ferentz credit. Say what you want about the offense, you've got to give a head coach credit for how he finds ways to win games.
So there's a lot to unpack there, positively and negatively. Mostly positive because they are 6-1, because they did win the biggest game of the season to date, and most likely the biggest game of the season period in the regular season. Wisconsin is 54th in rush defense in yards per carry, and that's after the 4.8. So
that's
I
pretty
believe
good.
These are updated stats, but they're 54th in rush defense. They're usually top,
I know,
5 to 15 in the country in rush defense.
Think about how, but Mark, think about how inept Iowa's rush offense has been in recent years.
I understand that's a good effort, but I'm just outlining that Wisconsin's nowhere close to where they typically are in rush. Like if we would go year to year, Wisconsin's rushing defense,
yeah,
it's elite. Typically,
Iowa hasn't, over the last several years, Iowa hasn't been able to run against almost anybody. They struggled to get the run game going for a while against Western Michigan. Eventually got it going in that second half. They didn't run particularly well against Utah State week 1. So, I mean, just to do it on the road at Wisconsin, I understand,
sure.
It's different storyline there, different team to an extent, but I mean, they've showed life. They've shown life not only in this game, but they showed life against Iowa State, and they showed life against Purdue.
The other part in analyzing the statistics and taking away or including the long run, I think you can look at it both ways, because I do think that there is some credibility and validity to taking out a long run if it's against the norm of the rest of the way a rushing attack went. To just say, okay, let's see what it looks like. That counts. And believe me, that counted on Saturday. It was a game that was 21 points were scored. Of course, it was in large part the biggest play of the game. So it was huge. I think sometimes people do that for one reason, just to show, okay, how effective was the team the rest of the time? Because there are usually like 40, 45 carries in a football game. And if one does that much damage, how consistent was the running game otherwise? So there's an obvious reason to do it. But there's also an obvious reason to do it because sometimes a run like that, the yardage is a conclusion to where you are on the field. If they would have snapped that ball at the Wisconsin 25-yard line, he would have run for a 25-yard touchdown.
Sure.
And the effectiveness of the play would have been exactly the same. So there's a portion of it there. It can also be argued on the positive side that play is more effective than having 80-some yards of rushing yardage going between the 30s or 40s on 5 different series, getting a couple first downs, but not sustaining the drive and punting and back and forth, where you gained 80-some yards on maybe 16 or 18 carries, and it was pretty productive, and you held on to the ball, but you didn't produce anything. Where if you've got big play, but we are constantly, or I'll put it on myself, but I believe you're in this boat as well, that there's a explosive aspect that's missing from the Iowa offense, and we've certainly addressed that. So there's your explosive play right there.
Yeah, and again, I would be a little bit more willing to, side on. I mean, you look at it both ways, like you just outlined, but I'd be a little bit more hesitant to include it when I'm evaluating the run game on Saturday if they hadn't done it against Iowa State and against Wisconsin. And they've got that trend. They're building up that reputation for breaking off bigger runs, which is not something that we've seen a lot of with Iowa, but they have changed the run game up a bit, and schematics and blocking scheme and whatnot. And obviously that offensive line has gotten older and the running back room has gotten older. By the way, to Smiles Per Gallon in the chat, I've never called Caleb Johnson an all Big Ten type of guy ever. Those are the people that they hop on the bandwagon when the bandwagon is spicy, when it's hot. All right. When it's favorable. I've had people on my post-game show, he's going to be a tank, and then Jazz Patterson has a big game. Oh, I had a guy say, oh, he's going to be one of the best running backs ever to come through here. And then, LaShawn went off for 200 yards. Oh, look at him. That's why I stuck with what I said. I think Jazz is the most all around back on this team. I think we're going to see that. Well, I could be proven wrong. I think Jazz and LeSean are the most well rounded, and until I see Caleb with a better ability to make guys miss or to run through guys, I'm a little bit hesitant with where Iowa's run game is at. I mean, certainly not going to put him on the bench. He's a good athlete, but we used that term glider before. That's kind of how he is. And I just think LeSean and Jazz fit the system better. And that showed Saturday. And by the way, real quick, you're never going to, I'm not ripping you. You are never going to, rest of the season, Mark, you're never going to come on this show and just rave about how impressed you are with Iowa. It doesn't matter what
with the
they
Iowa
do.
offense.
Well, in general, because I know it's not pretty to win games 15-6.
I'm not really in that boat. I'm not the person who I'm typically out there defending Iowa, because to most football fans, they are way on the other end of the spectrum of this is atrocious. I can't even watch this.
That's just stupid, though. Can I just say this? And to David Green, is it Greenshield or Greenfield?
Well, it's not stupid if you're analyzing the football and how effective it is. But if you're just saying this is what I don't want to watch,
okay,
well, that's personal preference.
Right. And one could also argue that let me be on the Iowa side for a second. One could also argue that 50-51 with no offense, no defense is not pretty football. It's crap football.
Yeah,
because you have no defensive play, right?
Yeah, they're blown coverages. Guys don't know how to tackle. Yeah.
So I'm not saying either. I'm just saying they have found a way to win games this way. And although you and I are on the same page as it relates to the future and how I don't believe what they're doing right now is sustainable through a significantly tougher schedule with the new Big Ten that's coming in next year, with the schedule remaining this year, they have a chance to win every single game on their schedule, on the regular season schedule from here on out, without Cade McNamara, without their two tight ends, and without a pass offense. I've never seen what we're seeing right now at the pass offense. It was bad last year, but like Saturday, they basically just said, we're not even going to try. Like third and 5, 3rd and 6, midfield, they ran the ball every time, because they said, we are not taking any chance of Deacon Hill screwing this up. We're just not going to. And I respect that to a point. I wish that they had more faith in the guy back there. I wish they had more faith in Deacon, or they had an option back there. And that goes back to our development topic and evaluation. But the fact of the matter is, if they can run the ball well enough to get by, then yeah, run the football and use the greatest punter that I've ever witnessed in college athletics, Torrey Taylor, at least as an Iowa guy. I mean, that dude was over 500 yards punting on Saturday. Use him to your advantage. He is a weapon.
In the moment, that is the way to manage the game. Absolutely. They can't do anything. Let's say they had a complete awakening. Kirk Ferentz woke up tomorrow morning and thought, this is not the way football should be run. I need to do something about this. Let's say he just had an epiphany out of nowhere. He can't do anything about this team. So you would continue to manage this team and play to your strengths and do exactly what they did on Saturday. 3rd and 5, you run the ball. There's no reason. Your defense is giving up nothing.
Right.
Okay, I'm going to, and then we're going to get to Daniel. Iowa, just a 3.5-point favorite at home against Minnesota. That's kind of a curious line, but we will get to the Minnesota breakdown here in just a second, because you made a loaded statement that we could talk about for hours probably. You said something about 5 minutes ago to the effectiveness, about how effective this is. It all depends what the goal is. If the goal is to win the division, this is extremely highly effective against their competition. It's highly effective. They are the masters at what they are doing. If the goal is beyond that, this is not the way to do it. You can't do this and win beyond the division championship.
Couple things. I'm not arguing with you again. This goes back to our discussions about the future of the Big Ten and how I don't think it's sustainable. I don't think it's sustainable at all when you get into the more elite opponents, and the Big Ten West is just bad this year. But let me say this: if the run game continues to improve, I know that some people just think you go to the Big Ten championship game, there's zero chance Iowa wins. I'm not going to say that. And I'm with you. I agree with you. You made a statement earlier yesterday. I think you jumped into our post-game show with Coach Patterson, and I heard you on that clip with your caller. Iowa right now should be rooting, Iowa fans should be rooting for Penn State to win the East. Because not only do you get a rematch, which it doesn't erase the 31-0 game, but if you're going to beat anybody, beat the team that embarrassed you 31-0, and hope that Ohio State and Michigan rack up other losses, which probably won't happen. But you do not want 3 11-1 teams on the East. I guess what I'm saying is they've got a chance to be 11-1 and be one game away from possibly being in the college football playoff. Now, what happens in the college football playoff? Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think it's going to be good. So we're on the same page there. I just look, it's hard to look at the schedule and say, and act like, well, Kirk Ferentz should be doing something different than what he's doing.
I agree.
This is where we're at.
Yeah.
And win these games. But I mean, I think the changes, the macro changes should have taken place in the offseason last year. And I'll encourage those again in the upcoming offseason as it relates to the offense being able to compete better. And a one-dimensional offense is not going to get the job done consistently against the elite.
Couple of quick things and we'll get to Daniel. One is that I posted a video earlier today on the main channel that you might be interested in watching because I broke down Iowa's path to the college football playoff and how I see it. I see it a little bit more. I see it exactly the way we discussed it at one point and what you just outlined in regards to that was the obvious conclusion I came to first and foremost too. You want the team that you lost to have that rematch to show we can beat them and beat them more recently. I came up with a different path though as well. So anyway, folks, go over to the main channel at some point, check out the Iowa video. I carved out a playoff scenario for Iowa that's feasible.
And real quick, before you throw Daniel in here, can I just give a big shout out? As I watched the game back, I was even more impressed with Sebastian Castor on Saturday. He played as well as I've seen any Iowa defender play all year. And that includes Cooper DeJean, who's had a couple of really great performances. Y.A. Black's played really well. Jay Higgins has had some big performances. He's one of the leading tacklers nationally. Sebastian Castro was everywhere. And I've had doubts, or maybe not doubts, but questions about, is he going to be able to meet what guys like Geno Stone and Amani Hooker and Dane Belton did at Cash? All those guys are playing in the league. On Saturday against Wisconsin, he looked like the best guy they've ever had at Cash. Now, part of that may just be the matchup and how Wisconsin plays, but man, he was really, really impressive in every facet of the game.
Yes, I posted a few times on Saturday about him. He had a remarkable game. I would love to be a fly on the wall of the Eastern Division winners defensive coordinator, or if it gets to a playoff situation, a Georgia defensive coordinator, whomever, watching film on the Iowa offense.
Yeah.
It would just be interesting to sit there. And I'm not saying it would be comical. I would just be interested to see them watch it and think, okay, what do we have to game plan? What are we game planning against? What are we doing here?
Criticize it if you want.
Play like a base defense and like I guess I'd load like 9 in the box.
Well, I tell you what I do. Here's one thing I'll do. If I'm an opponent, I'd tell Iowa, I'd make Iowa stop run their empty crap with Deacon Hill. I'd be sending 6 every time. And if I see them going out with, whatever it may be, 11 or 12 personnel and then going empty, I'm switching things up and I'm sending the house because he is not a threat to run. And Iowa does not have man beaters down the field. So that's one thing I'm surprised opponents haven't done. But as it relates to film, you're absolutely right. Watching the Iowa offense on film, they are not trying. They just take a completely different approach to football. Even though the goal is to score points, the goal is not to score points in Iowa's mind. The goal is to win games. And they believe, and they're pretty good at doing it, that they win games through field position and with their punter and with their gunners and with being patient on being in the right spots on defense. It really is a work of art. People can say what they want about how ugly it is. It's a work of art what Phil Parker, LeVar Woods, and Kirk Ferentz have done. I don't give Brian a ton of credit for this. You got to give him credit for the run game improving. He's the OC, but Kirk Ferentz is the head coach, keeping the guys together, and there's never any resentment, it seems like, from offense to defense or vice versa. It's just an impressive thing.
It is impressive. And again, I only question it depending on what the goal is. I would love to have a one-on-one with Kirk and have him honestly give me an answer of what the end game is supposed to be.
I think the understanding, whether he says it or not, is that he doesn't feel like that Iowa is able to compete with personnel. They're not able to compete for national titles. So we're going to do the best. We're going to squeeze every last ounce of ketchup out of that bottle and win every, and fair enough to an extent, because they haven't recruited well enough. They don't develop well enough on offense. That's a different discussion. Based on what they have right now, they're playing the way they need to be playing.
We've got a guy here, Daniel House from Gophers Guru, who knows analytics and metrics as well as anyone I know. And Daniel, great to see you. Thanks so much for stopping by. Of course, the annual rivalry game that is protected in the future, so it will not cease. It will continue on a yearly annual basis. Daniel, what you're seeing out of Iowa, just in terms of the analytics and the metrics and all of that, how much of an aberration is it?
I can't even believe the offensive metrics. I sat down and looked through it, and I'm going, man, how in the heck are they doing this? But it comes back to field position, punting, flipping fields. It's crazy when you're backed up. You have a quick drive, 3 and out, 65-yard punt, and you suddenly flip the field, or you're pinning an offense back, and maybe your defense creates a takeaway. I think it's remarkable what their defense does when you consider the fact that they're 3 and out all the time. They're on the field for like the third most snaps in college football. Like that, the fatigue doesn't set in. They maintain the discipline. They tackle well. They play with good fundamentals. And I thought in the Wisconsin game, they continue to just run the ball, and they kind of lull you to sleep, but then they make just a little adjustment where, some orbit motion, or mix it up with a different concept, maybe running some more gap schemes this year than they typically have, it seems like. Change up slightly in the rushing scheme to make enough plays, maybe where you can pop off one big one that gets you some points offensively, and then it's always the formula: field position, takeaways, those big plays from the defense and special teams that prop up the offense. That's my outsider's take.
As I was there in Madison on Saturday, and I'm watching that opening run, that opening score, I made the comment to the people around me, that might be enough. It was 7-0 in the first quarter, and I'm like, that might be enough. And sure enough, it would have been. I mean, if you just look at the score, right? I mean, Wisconsin ending up with 6. So, yeah, it is weird, and they have run more gap stuff this year than ever before. And a lot of fans, even the casual fans that don't know anything about football, they've been calling for that for years. And maybe that is the John Budmeyer influence. I think Kirk would say that he's just got linemen that he feels are more equipped to execute in every aspect of the run game. And so, and again, let's not take away from pass protection, even though Deacon didn't, by the way, I have the stats written down. Where do I have the stats written down? I have them somewhere. He had, let's see, 36 yards towards the beginning of the second quarter. He ended up with 37 for the game. He had one completion for 1 yard to Nico Ragaini in the last 3 quarters. I'm not kidding. That is insane. Actually, I think it was Johnny Pascuzzi, the fifth string tight end. One completion for 1 yard, definitely in the second half, but basically the last 3 quarters. And they won by 2 scores. So it's incredible. And Daniel, you, again, I think you would be great on the Iowa beat because you do love the numbers and the analytics so much. I'll give you a number that struck me heading into Iowa, Wisconsin last week. As of last week, and I'm guessing that hasn't changed. It certainly hasn't changed on Iowa's end. Iowa's the only team in all of the FBS to be averaging more punt yards per game than offensive yards. And that gap only grew on Saturday because Torrey Taylor went for over 500 punting yards. I mean, it's incredible. And Mark, you can rub your head all you want. Let me tell you something right now, buddy boy. that game on Saturday, you watch what Torrey Taylor did, and Brock Heward and Jason Benetti were raving about him as well. His ability to kick 60 yards, his ability to kick inside the 5, consistently get inside the 20, to kick with, every sort of pressure coming at him. I mean, he is an NFL punter. And then you get it, you got an NFL punter, potential NFL kicker. You've got that defense. You got the Phil Parker schematics. They have a propensity to create safeties and obviously interceptions. I mean, it's just, they're so complete in special teams and defense that it really, with the schedule, it almost doesn't matter what they do on offense as long as they don't turn the ball over. That's basically what Kirk said today in his press conference. He was asked about Deacon Hill. How do you get Deacon to the next step? Kirk answered the way he should have. He was absolutely honest. He said, well, we're going to keep working on him. He's talking about completion percentage. But he's like, Deacon didn't turn the ball over once. And that is priority number one. Protect the football. That's priority number one. And that's why, again, as I'm standing there in the stands on Saturday, I'm seeing them at 3rd and 5, 3rd and 6 from midfield. They're running the ball every time. You knew they were. And Kirk Ferentz is fine. He's fine with not getting the first down. He's not upset about it at all because he's going to go pin him back inside the 5 and then dial up a blitz and get a safety. This is just how they play. It's incredible. They've been doing it for so long, but Saturday was such a prime example of how Iowa has won football games for so long. And you're right, it was the biggest game of the season. That's why I'm so much more positive, because I see, at least over the next month and a half, Mark, an opportunity for a lot of wins playing this brand of football.
A lot of wins, and one staring them in the face at home is against Minnesota, which the point spread is only 3.5, which kind of surprised me. Iowa was actually something in that range against Purdue, not an extremely good football team. But we'll focus on Minnesota here and the challenge that they bring. So Vegas looks at this as a competitive game. I'm highly confident Iowa's going to win this game. Like, I'm not confident they're going to win by much, but I'm confident they're going to win. Daniel, this Minnesota team is obviously not as good as the last few editions. What are the issues?
I would say some younger players on defense stepping into bigger roles this season, and there's been some growing pains with that. Maverick Baranowski had 0 snaps last year. This is his first taste of it. He ended up being thrust into the role with Cody Lindenberg suffering a training camp injury. And Cody was on track to be maybe the best linebacker in the Big Ten overall. And they haven't had him at all. He might be able to come back for this game. He's been working his way back slowly. Minnesota just came off the bye week. There were a lot of little dings. Darius Taylor on the offensive side, freshman running back, who's played very well, breakout player this season. He suffered an injury and wasn't able to play the previous week, but I think they were kind of setting that up for him to get healthy and return for this one. So when you look at Minnesota's defense, it's been just little detail lapses where it's an eye discipline mistake here, maybe didn't communicate correctly. Just a few plays over the course of the game that are explosive ones. And, that's really hurt them defensively. And I say offensively, it's execution. The North Carolina game, you can go back and look at like 4 balls that if they're placed just a little bit better, they could have had explosive touchdowns. They've been managed to run the ball rather well. The offensive line, I think, has played great this season. There hasn't been an issue up front in that respect. So I believe if they can navigate some of the detail lapses that they've had on both sides of the ball and even on special teams too. I mean, it's like fielding the kickoff return and falling out of bounds at the 3. You got yourself backed up early in a game. Just these small detail lapses. The Northwestern game is a perfect example. I mean, you got a 21-point lead going into the 4th quarter, and give up a whole bunch of explosive plays and can't sustain any drives, and then Northwestern pulls off the comeback. So I feel Minnesota, you look back when they have a rest advantage, they're 10-1 since 2019. So it's something to watch for. Minnesota does a nice job of resetting, retooling, getting healthy during the bye week. They have a really detailed approach for that. So I think that could be weighing into some of that Vegas line as well. Minnesota's success coming out of the rest advantage.
I was going to ask you about that, Daniel, just the bye week success in the past. And obviously this is a different team, but I think that's a valid stat. In Iowa, I don't know what Iowa stats are coming out of bye weeks. Based on recency in my memory, they're not great coming out of bye weeks. Now some of that's luck of the draw and who you play week coming out of a bye week. But, is it fair to say Minnesota has not been impressive really against anybody this year? I mean, they weren't real impressive against Eastern Michigan until late. They squeaked by Nebraska, obviously got pants pulled down against Michigan, and then blew the game to Northwestern. And North Carolina is the one I'm missing, I think. And Louisiana was fairly close. Is that a fair statement to make?
I would say they haven't played a complete game all year, where something has propped them up, where the Eastern Michigan game, they were able to run the ball effectively. The Nebraska game, defense held them up with a couple of key takeaways. Tyler Nubin had a big game. Eastern Michigan, like I said, able to run the ball. Louisiana, I thought they bounced back very well in the Louisiana game. Ethan Kaliakmanis maybe played his best game overall, being accurate, reading things, setting things up. I believe that's been the biggest thing. I believe people underestimated the growing pains that occur with playing a younger quarterback. And I know Ethan got some experience at the end of last season, including playing Iowa last season. But the continued reps that you need to have to be able to be successful. Teams are scheming with the change in the picture of the coverage, especially when they get Minnesota backed up to, make some, pick sixes. I mean, Michigan had 2 pick sixes in the previous game. I think that's going to be Phil Parker's approach, is try to get Minnesota backed up, get them off schedule. Minnesota is not effective offensively when they're not efficient on first and second down. When they're backed up into third and long, that's the recipe for success, because then you can sort of change that coverage picture and do things to potentially bait Minnesota into some mistakes. So that's been the storyline. Is there was going to be highs and lows with the quarterback. It's now, when is he going to really take that next step forward? I think that's still the question that many people have.
So this team's not a contender in the West this season because the defense is not nearly as good, basically. Would you say that that's just the bottom line?
The deal is, I don't know when it's going to come together for Minnesota. Like, I don't feel like it's that far away from clicking, because if Cody Lindenberg's able to come back, he's the catalyst of that defense. Minnesota at the linebacker position, they put a lot on the plate of the main guy, where it's like, you got to adjust, you got to make all the calls, your zone drops have to be tight. They've had some lapses with that, where they've been getting hit over the middle of the field. It's tackling here and there. And the big thing is health as well. There's a lot of little dings on the defensive side of the ball. I think the bye week is going to be critical to just get guys back healthy again. The pass rush has improved, in my opinion. It was something they put a major emphasis on. They're getting more interior push. Kyler Baugh, the defensive tackle, has played very well. They haven't been able to finish a ton of rushes. They've had some retracing problems and some pass rush lane issues. But for the most part, I do believe the pass rush has a lot of potential, something that could take a step forward. This type of game, I think Minnesota, what they're going to do is they're going to load the box, try to stop the run, get Deacon Hill backed up, and then, send a lot of blitz pressure. I mean, you look at the numbers when blitzed, I think there's some opportunity there for Minnesota to exploit if they can get Iowa into passing down situations. I mean, they're dead last in a lot of those key metrics when teams are able to knock them off schedule. So that's kind of the key. I think first and second down, whoever does it better in this game will end up winning, and Minnesota has to get off to a very, very quick start. I'd come out with trick plays and first drive, take the football and try to go down and get an early lead, because if you can do that, you could potentially, get the flow of the game going in your direction.
I agree with that. And Iowa's been taking the ball first lately. And I think their theory is we can get – it's not because I think they're going to score first, at least not on that opening drive. It's because, hey, we can, get a couple of first downs and then pin you back, when we have an NFL punter with the leg Torrey Taylor has. So, Iowa converted, I think they advanced the ball 3 or 4 times on the opening drive, maybe not quite that many, at least 2 on that opening drive against Wisconsin. And then they had field position. The rest of the game, they couldn't convert a third down. I think they started off like 3 of 4 and they ended up like 4 of 15 or something insane. So You're absolutely right. And Daniel, if I'm Minnesota, I'm blitzing the heck out of Deacon Hill. And again, I go back to what I said before you jumped on with us. The fact that Iowa even tries to go empty early in series, and nobody's paid him pay for it. And I would just think somebody eventually will. And maybe it's Minnesota since they had an extra week of prep. PJ's not had it. We know about the storylines with Iowa, Minnesota. I'm sure this is a game that he wants. And, I will say the last time Iowa had a run game against this team was 2020 up in Minneapolis. And that was the, we'll leave our timeouts here and take Floyd with us game. But this, I don't know about the line, Mark. What you said 3.5 right now?
That's what I saw.
I don't think that's that far off. I don't know why you'd favor Iowa by any more than 3 to 7 points in any game the rest of the year. Like even when they play Northwestern at Wrigley, that line better not be more than 6 or 7 points, even though there's going to be 75% Iowa fans in that stadium.
Yeah, it's almost like Vegas needs a different metric, which is the point spread, but then also the confidence rate or the confidence percentage of win-loss. That would be extremely high.
It's just a difference when you're playing a line like this. A line like 3.5 for Iowa it's such a normal occurrence. Whereas, if Ohio State maybe that's a bad example, but obviously a high scoring team is, favored by 2 to 4 points. It doesn't really mean much. You can almost call it especially if they're at home, you can almost call it an even spread.
The over-under is 32.5.
Wow. Well, again, they hit the under this past weekend, Mark, 15-6. So,
and against Purdue, they did.
Sure, they did.
That's another oddity in regards to the betting lines that our guy Steve Merrill, who joins me once a week, says is that the conventional wisdom would be on these super high over-unders that you take the under, and the super low ones you take the over, because there's going to be scoring in the game. There's no way these teams can consistently only score in the teens, but it's the other way around, that these games have come in. There's a stat that if the over-unders under 37, that the under comes in like 80% of the time.
And Daniel, do you know, you probably looked at the box score. Do you know what the discrepancy in pass attempts versus rush attempts was for Iowa Saturday?
It's significant. It's significant.
14 pass attempts for the game. By the way, like almost half of those came in the first quarter.
Yeah.
48 rush attempts. Now, the old adage is that if you can run the ball that many times, that typically means that you're just dominating the other team on the ground. But with Iowa, I think it more comes back to, again, the field position conversation. They would rather be risk adverse with third down, which you're going to see that again on Saturday. If they get behind schedule, they're going to run the ball a lot. And whether it's 3rd and 8, 3rd and 5, 3rd and 20, they're just going to run the ball. It's just, you just know that. And I've brought up waste downs before, Mark. Daniel would be a good one to talk about this. I had an interesting back and forth with Brian Ferentz during the offseason, Daniel. I asked him specifically about waste downs because Iowa doesn't get a lot of waste downs. He's not getting a lot of 8-9 yard chunks on first down. Mm-hmm. But the interaction I had was fascinating because he basically said, we don't coach that way. We don't call plays that way. And it was kind of an odd answer. He even told me that he could never foresee a scenario where 3rd and 1 is a waste down, which really blew my mind when I heard him say that he could never foresee a scenario where 3rd and 1 is a waste down, even in 4-down territory. But Iowa had 3 waste downs on Saturday, ran every time. And you could argue in a game like Wisconsin, maybe I should just shut up about the whole waste downs thing because maybe it's the right call. And I think that's how they're looking at it right now, is that there's more potential for harm if we put the ball up at any point in the game, even if it's 2nd down and 1, than there is, hey, let's chuck a throw down the field on a waste down and potentially make a big play. We'd rather just make sure. I guarantee you the stress for the running backs throughout the week leading up to the game with Liddell Betts and the staff heading into the game and during game day was to LaShawn Williams and Caleb Johnson, you hold that football like it's your newborn and do anything to keep anybody from stripping it. And I give them credit. They ran 48 times, not a single fumble. that is a good sign for a guy like LaShawn Williams, who has fumbled in the past. He was in the doghouse earlier this year with Kirk, I think, briefly. So they're doing what they need to do. 228 passing yards for Wisconsin, marked to 37 for Iowa. So.
And of course, Tanner Mordecai went out in the second quarter. Not that he was scoring either. So I'm not
into the
saying
second
that
quarter,
was the difference.
They didn't have any points when he went out.
Yeah.
Into the second quarter was when he threw a pass and hit, I think it was Jay Higgins' helmet, and broke his hand. Sounds like he's out maybe for the rest of the year.
If I'm not mistaken, Daniel, it was the North Carolina game in which I can't think of the backup quarterback's name, came into the game for like 2 plays.
Yeah, Cole Kramer came in. Yeah, took a shot at the end zone, got intercepted. Yeah.
They were down, I believe, a score. I think that's when they had cut it from 21-0 or 21-3 to 21-13. They're down a score. They're on a nice drive. Cole Kramer comes into the game and they take a shot to the end zone and he throws a duck that was picked off, and they never really challenged after that.
Well, yeah, that's what it's been for Minnesota in these games. There's 3 plays you can go back and look at. Could have been touchdowns if the ball's placed a little better. Then you got that interception. Like, Minnesota it's weird. Like, the season has been weird because it's had such ebb and flow to it, where every game's been a little different. They've played different stylistic offense and defensive teams, which has forced them to prepare differently. And I think that's created some challenges for the young quarterback too, seeing a lot of different looks and everybody scheming that way, trying to, create some confusion. And like, it's Michigan, for example, I thought wouldn't see as much too high shell in that game, but they played more of it and they, showed pressure and bluffed out of it. And that led to some mistakes here or there. They hit with a trap coverage early in the game where, they were reading that outbreaking route, number 2 receiver, and that cornerback has the assignment to just jump the ball and bait it into a mistake. So it's eliminating those small detail lapse mistakes and execution. Like, I don't think Minnesota there's going to be a moment where it clicks for Minnesota at some point this season. PJ Fleck's teams always seem to get better as the season progresses. And especially after this bye week where they had some time to reset, I want to see how they play. I don't even know what's going to happen, but some of those younger players and those transfers that they had come in, especially on defense, it's been a little bit longer process to get that to gel and play as one. And they've been working pretty hard to try to get it to that point. But Cody Lindenberg coming back, if he is able to return for this game, that is the biggest storyline entering this game. Watch 45 in this game because he is a very, very good player.
2 questions for me, Daniel, real quick, and then I'm going to go back to Iowa, and then I'll come back to Minnesota. Your college football expertise. If Iowa's 11-1 at the end of the year, is the playoff championship game? If they're 11-1, is the championship game a play-in game for the college football playoff? Do you think 12-1 Big Ten champion, with the climate of perception of the different conferences this year, gets them in regardless of how they looked in those wins?
I would be amazed. I think I have a better chance of winning the Powerball, but I would say if that occurred and they won the Big Ten championship, then they probably have to make it in. But I would be absolutely amazed
if they won the Big Ten championship.
Yeah,
but it is one game. It's one game, and I know it's. There have been our share of lopsided games. We saw Iowa against Penn State earlier this year not compete. I don't, and I know, Mark, you disagree with me on this, but I go back to, and fans will call me delusional if they want, but you go back to Iowa, Penn State this year, Iowa, Michigan in 2021, even Iowa, Ohio State last year, all ended up blowouts. But every single one of those games started close and stayed close for the first couple of quarters. And eventually the dam broke. If Iowa can, if in a game like that, the way they play right now, if they can somehow hit on a special teams play and maybe a defensive score, and they're able to run the ball semi-effectively, and you're up early, as opposed to being down like they fell in every one of those games, Farrakall doesn't fumble, maybe they get up in that game. I know you disagree with that, Mark, but I think it does change the outcome of the game significantly. Maybe not, win-loss, You made the comment when I brought that up a few weeks ago, Mark. Well, if Eric All hadn't fumbled and they scored a touchdown, wouldn't be 31-0, it'd be 31-7.
I don't even think I said 7.
Well, no, you did, because I said
no. I think I said 3.
Well, see, you're wrong. I think you're wrong about that, and there's
you,
no way
you
to prove
think I'm
it,
wrong.
right?
There is
You're
no way
wrong
to
about
prove it. I
Right,
don't
there's
see
no way to prove it.
the way Iowa failed to move the ball. I don't see them scoring against Penn State on that night in that game. I'm not talking about a future game.
Well, they were moving the ball that possession until Eric All.
Yeah, I don't see them driving in for a touchdown.
No, maybe not. They could be up 3-0, and sometimes that's all that Iowa needs.
Yeah, it sounds like I've got a lot more confidence in Iowa than a lot of people I talk to, because I do think that they would have a chance in the Big Ten championship game. I think that they would be an incredible underdog for a conference championship game. They'd be a 17 to 20 point underdog, and they would have, in my estimation, maybe a 10 or 15% chance of winning that game.
Well, for people like see Steve in the chat, Iowa shouldn't be thinking about Indy. Well, the players shouldn't. Be taking one game at a time.
Yeah.
They are in control of this division. They can lose a game. Now, if they lose a game and they're 10-2, they're not making the playoff regardless of what happens in the championship game, and that's fine. But they have to lose, because Wisconsin's going to lose to Ohio State. So assuming that happens, unless Minnesota all of a sudden beats Iowa this weekend and runs the table, or Nebraska runs the table and beats Iowa, Iowa is strongly in control of their own destiny right now. So, I mean, it is a fair conversation. We're 7 games into the year. They are the clear-cut favorites at this point if they weren't preseason.
Oh, absolutely, they are. I'm going to make a ridiculous statement, but it is possible. But I should have no confidence in this team, and I do not have any confidence. But there are other teams that hold. So there are multiple teams that hold their own destiny right now, and Nebraska is one of them.
Right.
If they win out, then they win.
That's a tough defensive scheme code to crack. They will beat somebody at the end of the season that they probably aren't favored to beat. That is my prediction.
Honestly, I could see Iowa losing to anybody left on their schedule. I will openly admit that. But I also believe they'll be favored against everybody left on their schedule. And they're not going to get blown out by anybody left in their schedule. So
I think Minnesota coming off a bye week is fascinating. I feel like they're going to have some stuff that they put in this week, or they're a little more healthy now. I think this game will be more intriguing than people think.
I had a caller phone in on Saturday, or I think it was last night during our part 2 of our post-game show with Coach Patterson. And Daniel, it was a Minnesota fan who made the statement that Brevin Spanford has not been very good this year. He's had some drops. I mean, he came in maybe hyped up to be the best tight end of this conference. What have you seen from him?
Yeah, I just think it's exactly what you said. Some drops here or there, ball placement here or there, that if it's better, maybe has a chance to score. There's been a couple of those situations. It's one of those things where he had like high expectation level, and the bar hasn't been hit yet. But when is it unlocked? Is there a point where you reset, you think about some things, you try to incorporate more designs that revolve around Brevin over the course of the end of the season here in the second half? That's one of the things that I actually wrote about, is finding ways to get him even more involved and get the offense into a groove, maximize your personnel. I feel like Minnesota offensively, it's just been one thing here or there. It's ball placement off here, drop there. Like, if they can clean up those execution lapses, the offense will look better. It's just it's been a weird year where all the pieces haven't come together. The puzzle pieces are there, they just haven't quite meshed together yet, and I don't know when it's going to click. I don't know, but there will be a point this year, I believe, when it clicks.
And Mark, Don Patterson, of course, runs the analytics for Iowa each and every year, and the parameters that are essential for victory. I can tell you, Iowa, Minnesota, the last 2 years, that game has been an anomaly, because in each of those games, Minnesota's won more parameters, Big Ten parameters that have been assigned. So the numbers game Minnesota's had in their favor. And Kirk mentioned that today during his press conference. It's very rare that you can win any game, especially on the road, when you're giving up 300 rushing yards, which is what Iowa did a year ago. Now, different attack, right? Different running back room. They don't have Mo Ibrahim, walking through that door. So I'll be interested to see schematically what Iowa's defense looks like, because they have been exposed a bit on the ground against this team.
Yeah, Minnesota's been able to run the ball effectively. They use that short toss at Iowa to had some success with that in the previous matchup. And then last year, they were able to run the ball well with Mo. And I mean, last year, you look at the game, it was turnovers were the big factor. I mean, you had the interception late in the game, you had the fumble. If you're able to sustain that drive, able to bleed the clock down and get points, you're probably leaving with a victory. You go back and look at the Iowa Minnesota matchups, there's like 3 plays every game that end up being the difference. And that's always the case. I actually believe that in football, that it always comes down to 3 or 4 plays every game that sway the outcome.
Especially for Iowa.
Yep. Especially when your margin is like this, you know, which is that style of play.
Minnesota led the game last year and was driving in the red zone, right? To go up 2 scores, fumbled, and then,
Yep. And then add the interception too.
Yeah. This is what Iowa does. I mean, I know that's not the best analysis, but that's what they do. One thing that I didn't listen to Luke Fickell post game. I intend to go back and do that, but somebody did call into the show as well and made the comment that apparently Fickell made a statement about Iowa on tape that basically, hey, we didn't realize how good this defense was until we were out here on the field. And I asked Don Patterson the question. I said, Don, is it possible that, because he's obviously watched a ton of film in his day, especially being an offensive coach, looking at a defense on film, is it possible that with a team like Iowa that maybe doesn't have the best metrics, the best athleticism, the biggest, strongest, fastest guys, that they can be deceiving in prep? And he said, absolutely. And I think that's what Iowa does. We always hear this, and I think Brock Hewer did a good job on Saturday during the broadcast, and we've had some better analysis, I think, during games the last few weeks on this. But how sound, and Urban Meyer talked about it on the Big Ten Network here last week, how sound Iowa is in their fits. They're always in the right spot. I mean, it's amazing how Phil has united everybody across the plane, whether we're talking about Kelvin Bell on the defensive line, you're talking about his cornerbacks, you're talking about Seth Wallace's linebackers. Everybody is so united in how they play football. And I know that sounds cliche, but they're just always in the right spots. So the need for speed and athleticism doesn't hurt you in a lot of these games. And for the people out there, I saw some people earlier in the chat bring up, they're going to be able to win this game until they play a good team. Wisconsin is a good team. Okay. Let's cut the crap on that. And honestly, Iowa State.
They mean a really good team.
Okay, but that's, I know.
I'm sure they mean.
Okay. Elite team. But guess what? I think Iowa State's actually a good team. They're going to make a bowl game. They've looked really good these last couple of weeks. Big 12's not great. I get it. But that's going to be a good win on the road. You think about their 2 best wins right now. No question it's their 2 road wins at Iowa State and at Wisconsin.
Hawkeye Howard wants me to wear an Iowa shirt. Like, what is this? Like, I am in, if anything, and I made the comment a couple of weeks ago that I was rooting for Iowa to go through and win the Big Ten championship this year, aside from a possible matchup against one particular team. So, So Hawkeye Howard, the answer to that challenge there would be, you need to come up with something that I win in response to, only suckers take bets where they are the loser, but they can't win anything. So I don't know, $1,000 in super chats, whatever you can come up with that will counter if I will take the Eastern Division winner, you take Iowa, I'll wear the Iowa shirt.
This is a better question for Daniel or Mark. What's the 3-way tiebreaker in the Big Ten?
So I've looked through this. I went through this when I did my predictions.
Record against one another?
Season.
I'm assuming.
So that 3-way. So if you run through most of the tiebreakers in any division, there are not assumptions made, but stipulations about those 3 teams losing to other teams. But with those 3, it just defaults. It just goes down tiebreaker to tiebreaker because we're going to make the assumption here that they win all the games against everyone else. So it comes down to like the 7th or 8th tiebreaker, and it's who played the 3 teams with the composite best record in the West Division. That's what it comes down to.
And my guess is that might be either Ohio State or Penn State, because Michigan doesn't get Iowa or Wisconsin. I guess that's my first thought.
Yeah.
But the reason I bring that up is how mad will you be? I know you're a college football guy, Mark. You are an Ohio State guy. As a fan, what are you thinking on, Iowa somehow beats Penn State in the Big Ten title game, Ohio State sitting at home at 11-1, with their one loss being to either Penn State or Michigan. What are you thinking as an Ohio State fan heading into Selection Sunday?
I think they get in.
I know you think that, but I'm saying if they get...
Oh, if they don't.
I mean, if they don't, let's just say they don't get in. They say the committee takes Iowa as a 12-1 Big Ten champion over a non-division winner, 11-1 Ohio State. How much outrage are you getting from Ohio State and potentially Michigan fans?
Oh, my word.
I mean, it's a fair conversation. I want it to happen on a number of levels.
Well, of course you do. You're an Iowa fan.
Well,
and you want to see the...
You told me a couple weeks ago. You told me a couple weeks ago you wanted to see it happen. You wanted to see
if
Iowa
it doesn't involve my team.
I know.
Yes.
I know.
I want Iowa to win the Big Ten championship against Penn State or Michigan. Yes.
Regardless.
Although I also want to see the league represented in the conference. And there's this assumption that a Big Ten champion with one loss is going to make it. Ohio State in 2018 went 12-1, won the Big Ten championship, was left out of the playoff. They beat 4 top 15 teams in the country, and they still got left out.
Yeah, I don't even know how that happened. You've told that to me a number of times, and I typically have a pretty good memory.
They lost to Purdue by 4 touchdowns. That was an egregious loss.
That was a Rondale Moore team on the road.
One bad day.
Yeah. So.
We have all sorts of fascinating possibilities. No question about that.
So what will happen if, real quick, let me just see the expression on your face when I say this. Iowa runs the table, wins the Big Ten championship, and then wins the college football playoff.
If the committee
wins a national title.
Wow, weird.
Just what will you say if they do that? Will you just quit? Will you just shut down the whole show? Just shut it all down?
Yes, I will shut it down. Why would I shut it down? It should start making me money. Yeah, for a team that's best win is against Wisconsin. Wow, that's a lot in front of them to try to get past.
And they won't have any better wins by the time we hit the Big Ten championship. Even if they win out, their best win will have been against Wisconsin.
Yeah. And that's why I believe Ohio State would get selected, because under that scenario, they would have a loss against Michigan or Penn State, which I'm guessing would be a much closer loss than what Iowa suffered against Penn State. They would have a win against one of those two, and they would have a win on the road against Notre Dame. They would have a win on the road like Iowa did against Wisconsin. So their resume would just be...
A couple things. Root hard. If you're an Iowa fan and you're actually dreaming of somehow squeaking into the playoff with this team, as delusional as that may sound, to me, you're rooting against Ohio State and Michigan every single week. You're rooting for Penn State this week against Michigan. You're rooting for Iowa State every single week. You're rooting for Iowa State to somehow win the Big 12. Yeah. Because all of a sudden that becomes a really good win if they can somehow do that, which I don't think they will. They got a big game next week. So anyways, I know this is probably boring to Daniel because I'm going off on these things, but it's a fascinating storyline. It
is fascinating. And Corey, if you check out my video, you may be surprised what formula I put together for Iowa to get to the college football playoff.
Oh, by the way, let's give a little tally mark to the Big Ten West. What happened this weekend that I told you heading into the weekend that was a significant?
Illinois beat Maryland.
That's huge.
That's huge.
It's huge. When you sit here and tell me that, when you sit here and tell me that Maryland's maybe the 4th best team in the conference. When you sit here and tell me that, and then maybe the worst team in the Big Ten West beats them, was it on the road too? Was it at Maryland?
Yes.
Yeah. Then, I mean, at that point, then I double down on my stance.
In what way?
It's
insignificant.
It's not insignificant. How is it insignificant?
Are we comparing the Big Ten East to the West, and we're gonna hold up one game?
We're not going to hold up one game. We're comparing everything past Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State in the East, and as bad as the West has been, I don't think it's quite as bad comparatively to the rest of the East, not counting those top 3 teams, as people make it out to be. I just don't think it is, and I think that's proof of that. Illinois might be the worst team in this division.
Well, maybe they aren't now. We'll see. We'll see them continue to play. I would say that I've been a great defender of the Big Ten Western Division for years and years and years and years, because the narrative has, I think, been way overblown. And I posted a video a couple of weeks ago talking about how bad the Big Ten Western division is right now, but also defending the Big Ten Western Division during the course of the history of the conference. Just because it's 0-9 in the championship game, that is matched an elite team, usually Ohio State, against somebody else, and that's just not been a fair fight. And other than that, the division has played well against the East. It's only got about a 13-game disadvantage. There's like a 13-game separation going into this season in 9 years. So,
and to Steve in the chat when he says, Corey, we need Ohio State to beat Wisconsin. Not necessarily. If Iowa wins out, it doesn't matter. That's what I'm saying. Like, if you have extreme confidence that Iowa is going to win out, which I don't think anybody has that level of confidence, but if they do, you'd prefer Wisconsin beat Ohio State because it makes the West look better, it makes Iowa's schedule looks better, and it gives a loss to Ohio State.
Absolutely. If the goal is just to win the West, then you want everyone in the West just to lose, right, because then you can have the worst record possible and win the West. But if the goal is to get to the playoff, you want the West teams to win. Although, yeah, there's always ways to slice it up. I've got 2 quick questions about Minnesota. One, Daniel, would be one of the more shocking results for me this season was when I discovered that Saturday that Northwestern, not that they beat Minnesota, but if I could have selected the most unlikely team in America to come back from 21 points down in the Power 5, it might have been Northwestern. And then they did it against the team that is, again, the defense not as good this year, but that has been airtight on defense. So that result and just that, how that game played out in the fourth quarter, any explanation for that?
Yeah, it was explosive plays, zone drops, not being tight, fitting the ball in, making big plays, got hit with a double move right before halftime and gave up explosive TD. And I knew at that point, I didn't feel like Minnesota played particularly well throughout the course of that game at times. Like the couple penalties here or there aided them. And it just never felt like the game was completely, like they were taking control of the game. So that was a weird anomaly type of game. I was actually at the game in Evanston, and I just, the environment there and everything about it was just hard to fathom. I was speechless at the end of it for a few moments.
I actually didn't realize that things were running late here. I had a question about the Minnesota program, but we've got an entire off season to bring you back on and talk about the program and the future and so forth. So we will do that at a later date. But Daniel House, everyone at Gophers Guru. Daniel, just let everyone know the best way to find you and what you've got available this week.
You can check out my work at gophersguru.com. The subscription package is $5 a month. Next gen approach to Gopher coverage, including some analysis of film, blending in the numbers, and then features on players and coaches, everybody associated with the program. And you can find me on Twitter at DanielHouseMN.
Very good.
And
thank you so much, Daniel. We appreciate you being
here, guys.
Thanks, Daniel.
Appreciate it.
All right. Minnesota, Iowa at Kinnick. I believe that's an NBC game.
It is. I like the games on NBC. I know some people don't like the coverage. Who did the play-by-play for USC Notre Dame?
That was Chris Collinsworth's son, correct?
I like him. I actually like him.
Some other things that I've seen, I don't necessarily care for him. I didn't really listen to the analysis or the game. Jason Garrett did the.
Yeah, those two have been paired up. They were paired up for the Iowa game a couple weeks ago.
Okay.
And so anyways, Hawkeye Howard, yes, the game's on NBC and Peacock. So any NBC games on Peacock. And the real Hayden made that super chat, and so did Pugmaster. So thank you to both of them. But the real Hayden, the whole Service Academy thing, if you had options, like if you had Because right now, Deacon Hill's not doing anything but being a play caller, facilitator. I don't think he's really doing a whole lot of play calling. That's actually a pretty funny statement to make. That's almost what they did, right? In some regards, they had 37 passing yards on Saturday. And again, 36 of those yards came in the first 18 minutes of gameplay.
I think it's Air Force that's actually becoming pretty proficient at throwing the ball.
Army is
throwing the ball.
Army is too.
Yeah.
Army's throwing the ball a little bit more than they.
Yeah.
Well, they throw the ball more than Air Force and Navy.
Yeah. Navy. I posted today, Navy, Pitt, Iowa, the 3 teams in America that have not completed 50% of its passes. But the other 2 don't have Iowa's defense and special teams.
Right.
So there you go.
And they don't have Kirk Ferentz as a coach. I think he's got to be given due credit for whatever the magic formula is there. Besides just having 2 really good units, there is something else in how they coach that they figured out a formula to win with a schedule like this, to win against almost everyone until you reach an elite opponent. That's a discussion for another day.
Now, if I wanted to play punch, counter punch, I could say, well, one of those other 2 teams has a coach who's won a conference championship in the last 20 years.
What do I care about Pitt?
I didn't say you cared about them, but I'm just stating that they won a conference championship 2 seasons ago.
Okay, well, and they took a nosedive when they lost their quarterback, so fair.
Well, actually, they didn't. They went 9-4. They won a bowl game last year. They did fine last year.
What are they now? They've declined since Pickett left, correct?
Yeah.
In general.
After Keaton Slovis left. Anyway.
Yeah.
All right, folks. Appreciate you being here. Corey, Coach Patterson, after the game, either here from the Hawkeye of the Storm. That's a place to get your Iowa football coverage every day. And we will see you back here next Tuesday.